Just because someone shares their DNA does not mean that they get unlimited access to you, and I think that that is genuinely one of the hardest things for people to wrap their heads around, because we have been conditioned since birth to believe that family is everything and blood is thicker than water, and you have to love them no matter what. And I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't love your family, but I am here to tell you that love and tolerance of bad behavior are two completely separate things, and you can have one without the other. So today we're going to talk about how to set boundaries with a toxic family member in a way that doesn't absolutely destroy you from the inside out, because I think the conversation is really surface level a lot of the times, and nobody really talks about really deep guilt that you feel when you actually have to cut off a toxic family member. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what toxic family behavior actually looks like versus someone who's just a difficult personality. You're going to understand why the guilt hits so hard and what to actually do about it. And you're going to walk away with a really clear plan depending on what your living situation is like and how often you actually have to see your family. Because those situations do involve different approaches, and I feel like nobody talks about that either. Before we get into it, if you don't know me, my name's Haley. I'm obsessed with all things healing, fitness, and productivity, and this is Healing with Hale. In this season, we are talking all about escaping toxic environments, which means escaping toxic family members kind of fits right in. So we are going to break this down by a few different chapters. This is going to be a little bit of a longer one. So chapter 1, we are going to cover why familial guilt is so deep and why it's so hard to shake. Chapter 2, we are going to talk about what toxic family behavior actually looks like. And chapter 3 is going to be the how-to, like how we are going to actually address this and what we're going to do about it. So I want to start with why the guilt hits different when it's from your family, because I really think that this gets skipped over a lot. And I think without understanding this, you're going to just fail at setting every single boundary that you try to set within those family relationships. And it's important to note that guilt is not evidence that you're wrong for setting a boundary or for cutting somebody off, because I think a lot of people interpret guilt as kind of like our moral compass telling us whether something is right or wrong, and we think that if we feel guilty it means that we're doing something bad. But that's not actually true, and it's especially not true in the context of a family that has been operating dysfunctionally for God knows how long, because in a system like that, guilt is actually used to keep you in line and to keep you in that same family system. So let me try to explain what I mean by that. When you grow up in a family where one person's emotions are always the priority of everybody else, or somewhere where conflict means punishment, or where love has always felt conditional on your behavior, even if those things weren't explicitly stated, your nervous system learns very early on that keeping that person calm is your job. And over time, this becomes such an automated thing that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. It just makes you feel like you're being a good child, you're just being a good sister, whatever it might be. And so anytime that you try to divert from that or do something different, your nervous system actually reads that as danger, and it's going to send up all these alarms, which are going to feel like guilt. And the reason that family guilt is so painful in particular is because these are the people that are supposed to be our first and most safest attachment. And so when those people are the ones who are doing harm to you, that creates this really hard cognitive dissonance where you're trying to hold two truths at the same time. So you're like, this person's supposed to love me, but also this person is hurting me. And your brain genuinely struggles with that because it doesn't compute. Your brain was not made to understand that. And the way most people resolve this cognitive dissonance is just by minimizing the harm that this person is doing to you, because that's easier than actually addressing the real problem here. And I think when it comes to toxic people or toxicity in general, a really common thing is people who are like, oh, just cut them off, you don't owe anybody anything. And I have talked about this before, but it's like, especially in a family sense, that's a really hard thing to justify and to also try to uphold. Because when it comes to family, a lot of times it's not as simple as blocking someone and then being like, oh cool, I never have to see them ever again. Because there's going to be holidays, there's going to be probably shared family situations, there's going to be shared family members, and sometimes there's even financial dependency here that we have to work around. And also the sheer fact of sometimes you might live in the same house as this person. So that obviously makes it a lot harder to just cut somebody off and never speak to them again. So the goal of this video is not exactly that simple, because there's not really one goal for everyone at the end of this video. The goal for everybody is to figure out which of these things that you should take away from this video and how to make a playbook that's actually going to be relevant for your life. And when it comes to cutting anybody off or changing your relationship with anybody, one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, are you staying in this dynamic because you genuinely believe that it can change? Or are you staying because leaving feels wrong? Because there have been so many times in so many relationships, whether it's friendships, romantic relationships, family, whatever it might be, where I have been like, I have to stay in this because it's the right thing to do, or I have to stay in this because I just don't want to leave. And that is not a reason to actually stay in a relationship, because the only reason that it would actually make sense to stay in those relationships would be if I genuinely believe that the relationship could be fixed or healed. So let's talk about what toxic family behavior actually looks like, because I do think over time it's kind of become a little oversimplified, and a lot of people will be like, my mom didn't let me go out tonight, she's so toxic for that. And obviously that's not what we're talking about. The first one is refusal to accept any accountability. And this is common in a lot of the things that we've talked about in this season, but in family specifically, it might look something like you trying to bring up your emotions or you trying to bring up something that this person has done to you, and in return, instead of accepting accountability or saying sorry, this person just goes, but look at all the things I've done for you, look what I've provided for you, look at all of these things that I did for you. And then the conversation goes into how ungrateful you are, how you just don't see what they've sacrificed for you, and then you end up apologizing. And it is a very disorienting thing to experience because you came into this conversation looking to try to work on something or bring something up to somebody that you're supposed to be able to have these conversations with, and you end up being the one in the wrong and then apologizing for things and then feeling very confused. The second one is using guilt as a control mechanism. And I think this has become so normalized in family situations that some people don't even clock it as manipulation, because sometimes it can be seen as love or this person caring for you or trying to protect you. And the most common form is when you make any attempt to have your own life, whether that's your own opinions, your own plan for things, or even to create your own space. And then you end up being guilt tripped for trying to do these things or told that what you're doing is wrong for any number of reasons and how much your decisions have hurt this other person. So if you say to someone in your family, oh, I can't come to dinner this week, and they say, I guess I just don't matter to you anymore, I guess we're just not worth your time at all, then you should know that that is not a person actually expressing their hurt feelings. That is just someone who's trying to use guilt to control you or to manipulate you. And it's designed to make saying no feel so painful and so uncomfortable that you just stop saying no and that you just start doing whatever this person wants you to do. The third one is unpredictability. And this one's a little bit tricky because in a healthy relationship, you have a baseline. You have a core understanding of how this person is going to act in any given situation. But with a toxic family member, you never know what you are getting into. One day, everything might be completely fine. They're going to be really warm and present in the conversations and maybe even complimenting you. And then the next day, they're going to completely switch it up on you and you're going to be like, whoa, what happened to the person from yesterday? And what that unpredictability does to you over time is it keeps you in a constant state of hypervigilance. You're always scanning the room. You're always trying to read the vibe, always kind of adjusting yourself before you even walk through the door. And that is genuinely one of the most exhausting things you can ever experience. And it's really hard to explain to somebody who's never experienced it before. And the fourth one, and this is very specific to family dynamics, is rewriting history. This is where your experience of your childhood, your emotions, your feelings, the things that you remember, gets repeatedly challenged or even flat out denied. And it's really disorienting because your memories are the only proof that you have that something even happened. So when someone you've known your entire life starts telling you that you're remembering wrong or that couldn't have happened, it genuinely makes you question your reality. And I think that that's why in family dynamics specifically, so many people take so long to realize that something is going wrong here because over time they've just been trained to not even trust themselves in the first place. And the thing that I think is important, and this goes with anybody who's toxic in your life, is you don't have to be able to diagnose them in order to know that how they're treating you is wrong. You don't need to be like, oh my God, I know that they're a narcissist, or oh my God, I know that they have this personality disorder. The only thing you need to know is, does this relationship leave me feeling constantly worse about myself? Or do I feel like I have to be somebody different in order to keep the peace here? And if the answer to either one of those is yes, then that is enough information to act on and to make your own decisions with. So now we're going to get into the specific how-to, and I am going to break this down by living situation because I think that's kind of the easiest way to compartmentalize these things. So we are going to go through 3 different scenarios here. One is going to be if you still live at home or if you're financially dependent on them. Second is going to be if you live nearby or you see them pretty regularly. And third is going to be if you live far away and you have that physical distance already. So if you live at home or you're still financially dependent on this person, I think that this is a really hard one and that a lot of people oversimplify it by just being like, you should just put a boundary in place. And so much of that logic does not apply when you're financially dependent or when you just don't have the freedom to actually get away from this person. So step 1 is something called gray rocking. And this is really useful for any situation where you are around a toxic person and you can't get away from them. Essentially, it is exactly what it sounds like. You are trying to make yourself as boring and as unremarkable as possible when talking to this toxic person. Essentially, you are becoming a rock. And the reason that this works is because a lot of toxic behavior is fueled by the response that the person gets from trying to make you engage in toxic behavior. They want to get a rise out of you. They want to start an argument. They want that emotional reaction because that's how they keep control of the dynamic. So when you stop giving them that, then the interaction has nowhere to go. So gray rocking looks like giving short answers, no emotional escalation, no defending yourself, and no explaining your reasoning beyond what is necessary. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my God, that sounds so miserable, and that it might feel like you're shutting down or like you're hiding parts of who you are. But the thing is, gray rocking is not a forever thing. This is not like who you have to become. This is just a tool for when you don't have the option to actually remove yourself from the situation yet. This means that the goal is just to stop feeding into a dynamic that is literally draining you. This means that when they say something that would normally trigger a reaction out of you, you want to pause, take a deep breath, and then just be like, okay, or I hear you, or any flat response that's going to just end the conversation. This also means you are not going to over-explain any choices or any decisions that you make to this person, because the more you explain to them, the more fuel that you are giving them to use against you. And when they escalate things, try to just physically disengage as much as possible. You can just sit there, think about something else, think about your to-do list for the day, think about everything you're gonna do after this conversation is over. And then if possible, just be like, I'm gonna go to my room, or sounds good, can I start the dishes now? Like whatever it might be, literally keep it as boring as possible. And for the love of God, do not tell this person that you're gray rocking them. I don't think that anyone ever would, but just in case that was ever a thought, I have seen some people try to tell the person that they are trying to set boundaries with that they are trying to do this. And that is not something that is productive, especially in a situation like this where you cannot get away from this person. And step number 2, for those who live at home, you want to build your internal life like your life depends on it, because it literally does. When you're living at home with someone who is toxic, it's really easy for it to just feel like that toxicity is all around you. Your entire life is just a toxic bubble and like you can't escape it. So one of the most important things is to have a life outside of that dynamic, whether it's friends, special interests, maybe a hobby, some kind of group that you've joined, even a job, because you need evidence that the version of you that exists in that house is not the only version of you. And also, the more perspective that you build on the outside world, the more perspective that you have to look back on what's going on at home and be like, oh, this is confirmation that is not something that I should be subjecting myself to all the time. So your task, if you live at home, is to find one thing to do this week that has absolutely nothing to do with the house that you live in. Something that genuinely makes you happy, something that you're interested in, or something that you just want to learn more about. Figure out what it is, and then every time that you are in a conversation with this person, or every time that you're struggling, think about this thing as something to look forward to. So for situation number 2, those of you who live nearby or see your family member regularly, in this situation you obviously do have a little bit more agency than somebody who lives at home, but you do still have to tread lightly in this situation. And I think this is actually where a lot of people live in this kind of toxic family scenario. You might have your own place, you might live in a different city or suburb, but you still have to go to dinners with this person. You might still see them regularly at birthdays or dinners or whatever it might be. And the main goal here is to really just learn to show up on your own terms instead of showing up on their terms. So step number 1 is setting up structured visits. The most practical thing that you can do here is to just stop the open-ended time with this person. That means instead of just going over to their house to hang out or just, oh yeah, I'll come over for the day, you are going over with specific plans. I'll come over for dinner on Sunday at 7 p.m. and setting up plans around this visit. So being like, oh, I have to leave by 9 so that I can go see so-and-so. And this does 2 things. 1, it gives you an exit strategy. And 2, it limits the time that you're exposing yourself to this dynamic without making it a big deal. So when making any plans with this person, you always want to make sure that you have an exit plan and how long you're willing to stay set up. And then when the time comes to leave, you want to make sure that you're not over-explaining. You're not being like, oh, well, I have to go on in this elaborate story to make sure that they know that I'm not leaving because I hate them. You don't actually really owe them that. You just want to keep it firm, but also non-negotiable. And if they try to guilt trip you or send you down any kind of rabbit hole of a argument or something along those lines, again, you kind of lean back to that gray rocking technique almost and just be like, oh no, I just gotta go do this. Great seeing you. And if for some reason the visit goes sideways before your planned exit time, it is completely okay to just leave and not really give an explanation. It's okay to just walk out and say, I'll see you next time. And step number 2 is you want to decide what you will and won't engage with. And this is more of an internal thing, but it is very important because not every comment needs a response. Not every bait that's thrown out to you needs to be taken. And deciding in advance what you will engage with takes away a lot of that in the moment stress that comes from trying to figure out how to handle a conversation with a toxic family member. And one of the most powerful things you can do with a toxic person is to just let their comments land and just don't even respond to it. Because there are some things that are simply not worth your energy, and the sooner that you can actually understand that, the better. Because a lot of times we get sucked into the, well, I want to prove my point, I want them to see my side, I want them to understand how I feel. And a lot of times that's actually not going to do what you think it's going to do. And you're going to end up just continuing the cycle of toxic conversations and feeling shitty about yourself and then being upset that you feel shitty and then going right back into it another time and expecting a different result. So your task, if you live within close proximity, is to decide on these topics beforehand. So will you or won't you engage in political conversations? What about religion? Are there certain topics that are just an absolute, I will not have this conversation? If so, you really want to make sure that you understand those topics and that you are prepared for them to be brought up and that you have a mental note note of how you're going to respond to these things when they do inevitably get brought up. And situation number 3, if you live far away or you have a pretty good amount of physical distance between you. And I think it's important to say that distance alone does not solve the dynamic. And this is something that I think I fully believed when I first moved 1,500 miles away at 18 years old. Because the dynamic can and will travel through a phone screen just the same way as it travels through a house. So I think a lot of people move away thinking that this will just solve the dynamic and that there won't be any problems anymore, and then they're confused when they're still getting guilt tripped over the phone. So step number 1 is to control the access point. The beauty of living far away is you really do get to choose how and when you communicate with this person, and I think it's a really powerful thing, but it's also really easy to feel guilt tripped when somebody texts you and you feel like, oh, you have to respond immediately, otherwise you're a bad person, or if I don't respond immediately, they're gonna think something happened and then they're gonna panic or whatever. So what this actually looks like in practice is designating specific times and places where you will or won't take a phone call from this person. And you can just set this as an internal rule. You don't have to tell it out loud to this person. You might be like, I will only take a phone call from this person when I'm at home, or I won't take any phone calls after 8 p.m. Whatever it might be, you know your rules better than anybody, and you can set them based on what your actual life looks like. And some things that are important to remember are you are allowed to not answer a phone call. The world is not going to end. It is not going to stop spinning. You are allowed to send a text that says, I can't talk right now. It doesn't mean that you're a bad family member or that everybody hates you. You're allowed to do those things. You also don't have to announce that you're reducing the frequency of phone calls or anything like that. You can just do it. And step number 2, something that I think is really up in the air and not necessarily something that everyone has or should do, is having an official conversation with this person. I generally am of the belief that having a conversation where you're trying to be like, this is everything you've done, this is how you made me feel, this is everything that's wrong with you. A conversation like that with someone who is not capable of understanding or hearing what you have to say is actually going to do way more harm than good. Because what actually ends up happening in these conversations is you go into it with a solid plan, you might bring up all of your points, and then by the end of it, you're going to be like, no, wait, why aren't we talking about all the points that I brought up? What's going on? Why do I feel bad about this now? Why are you trying to flip it on me? And then you've just wasted all of this energy on this conversation thinking that it was going to make you feel better, and in the end, you feel 10 times worse than you did before you started. So if a conversation is something that you desperately want to have and that you have set your mind on having, don't go at it from a point of, these are all the things that you've done wrong, these are all the ways you made me feel. Instead, go at it as a clear conversation about what you need from this person going forward. You can even go in with maybe a list of things that you're willing or not willing to do when seeing this person, and you can go at it from a place of trying to work with them instead of bringing up all the things that they did that are wrong. And if you really feel like this is the right decision, then I think you should go for it. But I will say, do not get your hopes up. If you were a little bit on the fence, there is a good chance that it will not go the way that you think it's going to go. And for those of you who know that it would absolutely not be a productive conversation, it is 100% okay to just mentally take a note of these things and create that distance yourself. And I also think it's important to note that this doesn't have to be a permanent decision. You don't have to be like, I'm setting these internal rules for myself and I have to follow them for the entire rest of my life. It could be like, I'm going to take some distance for a few months and see what happens, see if things adjust. Because maybe that toxic person is going to find someone new to spew all of their toxicity onto, and then they won't be as direct at you anymore. So your task, if you live far away, is to identify one boundary that you've been trying to hold, and maybe you haven't held it because it felt too harsh or it felt mean. Whatever it is, hold yourself to that boundary this week, even if it's something like, I'm only going to answer one phone call from this person for the entire week. One very important part of this episode is to remember that you are not a bad person from protecting yourself from somebody who is supposed to love you. And you are not required to keep tolerating behavior that damages you just because it's coming from someone who is related to you. And yes, love is real and family is important, but you can still decide that your mental health, your peace, and your sense of self matter more than keeping a relationship with somebody who is damaging you. So here's all the things that you are actually walking away with today. If you are living at home, start gray rocking immediately. Keep your responses boring and flat. Stop over-explaining and build a life outside your house as much as you possibly can. If you live nearby, do structured visits with a built-in exit. Decide in advance what you will and won't engage with, and stop treating your presence like something that this person is always entitled to. And if you live far away, control your access points. Pick the situation that actually applies to you, whether that's having a conversation or just kind of with internally protecting yourself from this person, and hold a boundary this week that actually matters to you. And remember that one boundary that you set and actually hold is worth more than 10 conversations that are big and dramatic and actually go nowhere. If any of this resonated with you, please click the subscribe button, because I am in the middle of a series that is all about escaping toxic situations, and every single episode is filled with real actionable steps that can actually help you out of that situation. And if you have any suggestions for topics that you want me to cover, please drop a comment below, because I would love to hear all of the suggestions. Until next time, be kind to your mind, to your body, and to others, and happy healing. It's right in. Every episode in this series is filled with actionable steps that can actually help you get out of that situation, and that is exactly what we are going to be covering today.